And this, we've got the cross-section of the brain, the sagittal section. You've got the picture in your book. I'm just going to use this one just to go through it with you. And as we look at it, here's the corpus callosum. It means hard body, corpus being body, callus being hard. It was the first hard thing that they came to as they were going down between the hemispheres. So here we've got corpus callosum. Right below it, on this one, you can see the ventricle. This would be lateral ventricle. There's the first one and the second one on either side. Third ventricle is associated here with the thalamus, and then it goes down the aqueduct sylvius to the fourth ventricle, and then down through the central canal of the spinal cord. When you look at this, I want you to recognize here the pituitary gland. Right here, if I turn it this way, you can see the olfactory and the optic. Right here is the optic chiasma, pituitary, the pons, and the medulla. Going from this side, it's easy to see the cerebellum. Right at this point is the pineal gland. It's for melatonin and for sleep control. The thalamus is so important. It relays the sensory. You've seen the term spinothalamic tract. It's coming from your hands, fingers, your extremities, up through the spinal cord to the thalamus, and then out to the part of the parietal lobe where it's going to be recognized for the sensory. And so we've got those. On here as well, I want you to recognize that below the thalamus would be hypothalamus. Hypo meaning below, so there we've got it. Hypothalamus in charge of so many things. It's in control of the autonomic nervous system, in control of sleeping, waking, your thirst, the control of osmoreceptors so that you know if you're thirsty. Those are included there as well. The pons means bridge, and so it's going to bridge between. Cerebellum, as you look at that, that's for all of the control of things like if you can shoot a basket, if you can play the piano, if you can tie your shoes. It's because the cerebellum has been organized so that it will give you that exact response. So if you've been doing this over and over, then it has become adjusted to that, and it knows to shoot that basket in the right place. So that one for cerebellum. It's interesting about this one, when you look through the notes, you'll see it's only 10% of the brain volume, but it's 50% of the neurons. Lots going on here. And so that's what we see right there. For the ventricles, we'll see them again later in the information regarding how much they make, how much CSF is there. So I'm going to leave that right now, and we're going to go to the brain itself. I'm going to hold this up just for a moment. And on here, this would be the central sulcus. This would be the precentral gyrus, the postcentral gyrus, and on the diagram that I've got on the board, we're going to look at that right now. So I want you to look up here, and as you look, that's the central sulcus. What does sulcus mean? It sinks in. Gyrus, it juts out. And so let's look for the precentral gyrus. Now, precentral gyrus is in which lobe? And when you look then, it's in the frontal lobe. So precentral gyrus, this first part that we've got, we're going to see is the primary motor cortex. This is where the corticospinal tracts. And so as we look, when you look at the term cortico, it's coming from the cortex out to the spinal cord, out to the hands and legs. And so corticospinal is motor. And so this one is motor control. In the textbook, you can see the picture of it's called the homunculus. It means little man. And he's just draped over this. And they've identified all the spots where the motor control would be specifically for your hands or your toes and having that. So we've got this one. This is the primary motor cortex. This is the primary somatosensory cortex. Somato meaning body, and sensory, of course, bringing in the sensory. This one now for spinothalamic, what is it coming from? It's coming from the hands, the legs, to the spinal cord, to the thalamus, out to the parietal lobe, to this primary somatosensory cortex. This area is going to let you know that you touched your fingers or something has happened with your toes, but it's going to let you know right there. It also gives you the feedback from the proprioceptor, so you know if you're laying down or standing up, it gives that information. It has got to come into the thalamus and it relays it from there out to the parietal lobe, to this primary somatosensory. Now, from there, let's go to this one. This is the sensory association area. And this one would be that if you have felt something before, then you could remember the feel or what it would be. Like if you're feeling in your pocket for your cell phone, you'd recognize, oh, that's my cell phone. You'd certainly know the difference between it and your keys. And what does that is this area right here. And so this one that we've got is the association area. And we've got that right there. Now, for this one, association area, we're going to go just down to here. And I want you to look at this, right in this area here. I'm going to just put an X. This one is the posterior association area. Posterior is taking some of like the occipital, some of the parietal, some of the temporal. So all of this area is coming together, and this would be the area that gets it so that you can recognize a face or you can recognize a pattern. This is where if a person has a stroke, then you could give them a plate of food, and depending on the hemisphere that the stroke was in, then they won't even look at the other side of the plate because they don't think it exists. In the same situation with a stroke in that area, if they're putting on their sweater, they'll put their right arm in the arm of the sweater. They won't put the left one in because it, to them, just isn't there. The same thing, they won't look that way. So if a caregiver's coming in or family's coming in, they'll often say to them, go to the side that they don't recognize. Try to get them to remember that they've got that side of their body because they neglect it. And so that's the posterior association area right there. For this one, I'm just going to shade it in just a bit here. And this one is the primary visual cortex. What does that mean? This is so that if you're looking at a box or a letter or a page, you can actually see what's there. This is the primary visual cortex. But the visual association area is beside it. And the visual association area would be that you recognize what you're looking at. Maybe you look at your hat and you don't even know that that's your hat. You might think that it's a car. It's that absurd. And so there's the visual association area that is in this way. I've mentioned in one of the comments about Oliver Sacks. He wrote a book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And the man just didn't recognize that was his wife. To him, it was a hat. And so we need this association area right here for the visual. Let's go right here, and this one is the auditory association area. And I'm just going to shade it in. So now we've got auditory association area. What's it for? If you hear some music and you think, I recognize that music, and then you start to try to think, what's the name of that music? Or if you hear a noise and you think, that sounds like thunder, that's because of the auditory association area, because you've heard the sound before, and now then your brain is trying to help you remember what it is. And so that's what we've got right there. I want to go to this part, and this part is the part that was damaged with Phineas Gage. Now, in the PowerPoints that I gave you, there's a picture of Phineas Gage. He had been foreman on the crew, and the tamping rod, as you could see on the PowerPoint, it went through his skull. This was the part that was damaged. And what it damaged was his intellect and his personality. And so he'd been dedicated, always punctual, and just a commendable employee. After the accident, he survived it, which was surprising. But after that, then he was shiftless, he used bad language, he didn't care about what he looked like. And so let's go into this one. This one is the prefrontal cortex. This is the area that is going to be the anterior association area. This is for intellect, for personality. And that's what we see with the injury, that those things were changed. So we've got these. You do need to know what's happening with these. And so I put questions on the multiple choice that help you to go through that. See that you know what's happening. And so we've got this. Now that we've got that diagram and you can go over it, what I want to do now is just go briefly to the following page. And if you'll go to page 77. For this one, once again, you can see what I've done on the model, and I want you to just look briefly at this once again. I'm just going to ask you some quick questions, see if you can remember what was happening. What was the name for this one? It was the corpus callosum. There are, as you can see in this, 4 billion nerve impulses per second going between the hemispheres. So going from left to right, 4 billion of those going through there. And so we've got this. What was the thalamus for, and where is the thalamus? So on this model, hopefully you can identify where the thalamus is. And of course, there it is right there. What was it for? Relaying sensory. Where does it relay it? To the parietal lobe. And it relays it, I'm just going to point here, to this area. Right here is the primary somatosensory, and that is where it gets relayed. So when we think of a spinothalamic tract, it's coming from your hands, your legs, to the spine, to the thalamus, and then out to that parietal lobe, where it will be identified. The next one, I'm just going to do a quick review. What was this space that's here? What does it contain? And of course, it's a ventricle. It's one of the lateral ventricles, and it contains cerebrospinal fluid. Right back here is the pineal gland, and that one is for melatonin and for sleep. Right between the cerebellum and the cerebrum are those two little bodies, and those are called, well, there's 2 on each side, so there's 4 total. Corpora quadragemina. Corpora meaning body, quadra meaning 4, Gemini meaning twins, so they're actually called the quadruplets. And therefore, startle reflex. If something crashes in the hall, you're going to immediately look to see what happened. And that is the superior colliculi. These are the top ones. Also, the inferior ones are so that you can hear better what's going on, because that's how you survive things. And so we've got those right there. Right here, I want you to recall what was the ventricle that was here. It was the 4th ventricle. 3rd ventricle associated here, 1st and 2nd in the hemispheres, and the 4th right here at this location. Now, that gets us through these, and so I'm going to leave it right now so that we can go on to the ventricles of the brain, and I'll put that up next.